Welcome to the If You Build It, Will They Learn podcast, a show dedicated to modern learning and development. With your hosts, Daniel Mendonca and Scott Babcock.
It's podcast day. Welcome to the show. This is If You Build It, Will They Learn? I'm Scott Babcock, and with me as always is your co-host, Daniel Mendonca. Daniel, how are things treating you today?
Things are pretty good. I made a promise a few weeks back that I would do this. Episode 13, my favorite number is 13. Pretty excited about today. Great to be here.
I feel like it's been a while since you announced the episode number. We were on a little roll there where you had like a little clever quip or something about the numbers. So it's nice to have you back. All right, on today's show, we are doing learning games and gamification. For most of my career, this has been sort of a hot topic of discussion, so I'm kind of excited to dig into it a little bit, debunk some myths, talk about exactly what is a learning game, what is gamification, and some of the differences. And we want to just make sure we level set on some of those misperceptions, and then hopefully give you some opportunities to find ways to employ this in your own programs and strategies as you look forward. So really excited. Let's dive right in.
Yeah, Scott, based on what you said, I think that gamification or learning games is one of the things that, I think we say this a lot, but there are a few hot topics, microlearning being one of them, learning objectives and strategy, taking things online. But I think gamification probably is right up there in that category of things we come across really frequently. There's a nice balance of we need to gamify our learning experience versus I don't want my employees playing games while they're trying to learn. Balance. So let's start today by defining what the difference is between a learning game and gamification as a macro strategy. So when you're thinking about gamification, I want you to, take a look at your phone, open up some apps, pretty much any app of airlines you fly on, cars you rent, hotel chains you like to stay in, places you like to eat, fast food chains, whether it's Starbucks or Chick-fil-A or Chipotle or Delta, and all of those have some sort of point mechanism or incentivization strategy that they try to gamify your experience within their brand. If you think about that, that's really where gamification is going to start. So it is an incentive-based motivation to drive towards the objectives that you want to achieve. In the case of a restaurant like a Chick-fil-A or a Chipotle, they want you to return frequently. They want you to continue to come back. So they will drive to incentivize you to do so. In the case of and I know I'm guilty of this because I travel a lot, I'm constantly looking for places or, the Hilton chain hotel, whether it's a Garden Inn or a Hampton Inn or whatever, or Delta flights or rent from National because of those sort of incentivizations. So really incentive-based macro motivation. And then if you look at the difference between gamification and learning games are really designed an activity, an incentive-based activity that you learn something while you're in and you're doing it. So specific actual activities, whether they're, they could be SCORM files, they could be in person, but they're intended to teach you something about what your objectives are while you're engaged in that.
This is always just a stumbling block of what I feel like is semantics for a lot of people that we talk to, that they see them as the same thing and they're really not. A learning game is going to have game mechanics built in a way to teach you, right? So there's going to be rules, there's competition, there's scoring, all of those things that we typically associate with a game. But it's meant to teach, it's meant to practice, it's meant to make you smarter, better, more competent in the skill you're doing. I think I'm always amazed by the idea of gamification and this sort of hesitancy from clients or people we talk to that, I would never do gamification or gamification would never work. And then when you do ask them questions like, well, do you have a favorite airline, or do you have a favorite hotel chain, or do you have a favorite restaurant or clothing line or whatever? And when you ask them, why is it your favorite? Because they almost always do. They'll be like, oh, well, I love getting my stars or my points or my reward number. And you're like, bang, that's gamification. And all of a sudden you can almost watch the light bulb go and go, oh, I don't even know it's gamification. That's the thing about gamification, is it's often so subtle that you don't always just pick up on it immediately. And I think that's what makes it really powerful, is that you're not focused on that as the motivating factor. It's just something you do because intrinsically we're all competitive based and we want to achieve and we want accomplishment, and we all kind of get a little endorphin rush from that. And I think that really helps to motivate your learners and incentivize them without just beating them over the head with constant barrages of like reminders and nagging. It's a very nice, subtle way to get them involved. All right, so you've decided that learning games, gamification, we kind of talked through what the differences are. Maybe it's time we think more around like, why would I do this, right? So what are the benefits of both to your learners, to your audience in terms of getting smarter, more proficient, more skills, more information so they can better serve your customers or sell your products, represent you as a brand or a company, right? Those are all things that we use training to better position our employees to succeed. So when we talk about like a learning game in terms of the benefits, again, we're using it as a training tool. So a lot of times this is going to provide them with practice, I think is really the biggest advantage to a learning game to a learner. It's giving them situational context. It's setting up a scenario. It's letting them apply knowledge and make decisions that potentially have consequences to the game itself and whether or not they succeed or they score higher or they compete on a more real level. But they're getting to actually practice and do. So when we talk about, from our perspective, sort of our methodology and philosophy, which we've talked about in past episodes, is the show me, tell me, let me do. Learning games are that let me do moment where they actually are taking something they've learned throughout a course or an activity, and they're getting to go back and apply it. I think that's where a learning game has its greatest value. And then gamification is really about learner engagement. Gamification a lot of times happens within the learning activity itself, but can also happen on a platform. It can happen in the system. It can happen as a result of doing training activities throughout the system itself and maybe not be embedded in each individual training. So you build greater motivation and incentive, which Daniel talked about a little bit, get them to return. I think gamification also sets a tone for your overall environment and helps you build culture in your learning as well, so that people recognize you as an L&D brand that should be attracting more talent or getting more better hiring practices or recruiting, things like that. You can really build a culture and a brand affinity, I think are really great ways to apply that as well.
On the notion of gamification, I think that going into just some statistics around it is about 60% of the population at some point in their life gamed, whether it was on Nintendo or Atari or whatever, or now it's PlayStation, Xbox, or PC. The incentivization around those games is the same sort of idea that's used, can be used within platforms, is identifying your objectives, which we've talked about a ton, knowing what they are, and using gamification to help build a learning culture. And I think that the term you're going to hear a lot, in the next 12 to 24 months is around building a learning culture, especially with what has happened to retail and organizations because of COVID. There's more reason to incentivize learning and engagement to help the people be better at their roles, become more efficient. So creating gamification strategies like having different single day activities that will allow you to come back to the platform more frequently and engage with micro content or bite-sized content. It's a huge benefit to the organization, because when you talk about financials, which we talked about before, there's no required labor spend to have them taking that training, and gamification can help you hit on those objectives, whether they're financial, whether it's building a learning culture. So there's a lot of advantage to the organization, but also we want being good at your job or improving down your path of learning to be something that motivates the user. But sometimes people need a little bit of an extra push, and gamification is great for that.
One thing that is really worth calling out too is a lot of times we mention things like motivation and incentives in the first place. A lot of our clients go as well, I don't have a big budget, right? So I don't have money to buy t-shirts to give away to everybody, or pins or pens or notebooks or whatever. I don't want to do a big sweepstakes with a big drawing. I don't want to have to constantly keep sort of feeding that machine. And the really interesting thing for me is sort of this human notion that we'll do stuff for free stuff all the time. And if you look at video games, which Daniel kind of referenced the popularity, which I think most of us either play games or know someone who plays games online or through PC or Xbox or PlayStation or whatever, most of us who've done it will sit and try over and over and over and over again to earn an achievement that is just words, right? That's all it is. It's text on a screen that says, hey, you accomplished this. It has zero financial benefit to me. Or to earn that pin or that badge that is, again, it's just digital. It's on the screen, and be recognized as you're one of 3% of people who've ever done whatever it is, right? And some of these are silly little things within a game, but we have a competitive nature that wants to go achieve and accomplish. And it doesn't always have to have like a tangible asset that comes back with it. Sometimes it's just the recognition of knowing you did something and achieved it that is motivation enough to keep going. And you can apply those same things. Put badges in your learning system, give ranks and status, let them build avatars. I mean, these are all ways you can ultimately build motivation and incentive through gamification in your system without actually having to apply a ton of budget to those. So it's not always about giveaways. They obviously work as well. That's more that extrinsic, tangible asset that you can give your learners. But don't be afraid to just give them what I like to call digital swag in the system, because a lot of them will just sit and try over and over and over again to be really engaged to earn that as well.
Yeah, I think you can use the same sort of philosophy with learning games as well, in terms of the benefit. Obviously, we'll talk more about when and why you would complete them. But if you think about a learning game, sometimes with longer learnings or content, users can or learners can choose to just click through the content. And if they know there's, if you have a little bit of an introduction at the start, and they know there's going to be a game at the end with a leaderboard where your name's going to appear next to your coworkers or next to the others at your location or your store, or just from a corporate perspective, you may take that a little bit more seriously. You may go through it a little bit slower. You may look to retain a little bit more information so you can do better on the quiz, get some power ups or different things in a game when you're really getting back into that information, and try to get higher up in that leaderboard. Going back to that competition, the competitive side of things that Scott mentioned, nobody likes seeing themselves at the bottom of the leaderboard. It's a little bit of incentive to keep going and push yourself. So I think that both learning games and gamification provide some great benefits to just encouraging the learner to progress down their own path.
All right, so we talked a little bit about the benefits of learning games, gamification, how it can really assist your learner, your learning culture. However, the reason it's a hot topic isn't because we all agree on this. That's important to note. So let's talk about a few of maybe just the common misperceptions or the defense or argument against that we hear a lot, and let's kind of talk through some of those. And the first one that we always hear, that always comes up first, is learning games, gamification, all they're going to do is distract my learners. It's going to take them away from work. It's going to make them focus only on a screen. They're not going to pay attention to my customers or to my work that needs to be done, my task list. That doesn't work for me. So let's talk about, is that reality?
Is it reality? Is it maybe slightly more distracting than your average learner, like your average e-learning? Yes, but I would also argue that boring e-learning content is distracting as well, because you're really not achieving anything. I'm going to go back to the underlying theme of pretty much every podcast we've recorded, Scott. You have to understand what your objectives are with the piece of content you're putting out. If there's a 90-second or 2-minute seat time, bite-sized learning that we're putting out there, is it to have some sort of game associated to it? Makes sense. But if you have a series of onboarding learnings, I'm thinking about a specific project that we worked on together, actually, where you're talking about 7 different chunks of content over a period of time, adding some gamification to that to allow progress, to show progress, to have status assists. And I don't think it's distracting at all. I would actually go the other way and say that it's actually going to make the learning experience more efficient for the learner, because they're going to be more motivated to complete it and complete it effectively. And I'm not sure it's distracting at all.
I think there's a couple things we can sort of take away from this that are really important. Number one, we've talked about it tremendously, and we will continue to, I'm sure, this concept of microlearning. We're not talking about building a game that takes 30 minutes to play, right? When we're talking about the time it takes you away from it, you should still be targeting those shorter seat times, keep them engaged for a short period of time, get them the information they need, and then let them get back to their work. So I think that's important. We're not talking about creating these long, drawn-out scenarios that take hours and hours and hours. We're still talking 5 minutes, maybe at most 7 minutes, something like that, and really trying to chunk these up. The other thing is, and I think this is another distinction we can make, is games versus learning games are two different things. A game, like let's just say Call of Duty, is not intended to necessarily teach you anything, right? I mean, it might help with hand-eye coordination or some other things that video games may have other value to, but you can sit and play that because it has entertainment value. The learning games we're creating are designed to give you information, help you practice, but they're not what I would call sit down and play for hours over and over and over again. That's not the goal. That's not the objective that Daniel was talking about. If your goal is to get them information and let them practice, they're going to do that. And they may want to play it once or twice to get on top of the leaderboard. But I don't think these are so addicting that you play them for hours on end, right? Like you're not just going to play them on repeat like you might other games. So I don't know that really holds water. And I also find that when you talk about learning environments, most folks want to get in, they want to take the stuff. Yes, I think there's value in having it be motivating and incentivized, but most of them don't want to spend all day in there anyway. I mean, I think you have to understand your learners as well. Their goal isn't to just spend time learning on a learning game. If they're going to be on a computer, they're probably going to find ways to browse the internet or something to really pass their time. So I think the objectives really matter there, and that distinction is important. That leads to another really good misperception that we kind of talked about quite a bit, is that learning games and gamification only have entertainment value. And I'm going to go ahead and start this one off in terms of kind of an experience and why we can kind of debunk this one. The reality is, studies have been done that show that gamification on its own can increase retention by 25% in your learners. They hold content longer, they hold it more effectively. And if your gamification has social elements to it, you can actually increase your learning by your retention by up to 40%. So the fact that they can work with peers and learn from peers and work in teamwork and in environments where they actually can do that actually can increase your retention even further. So, I mean, there's the studies are out there that will show you that gamification actually has retention value. I think that in and of itself means it doesn't have entertainment value for just entertainment value's sake.
Yeah, I think that's so accurate. And I think that we see the results from a platform perspective when we talk about gamification. It's a lever you can pull to reel people back into that learning culture you're trying to develop and get them engaging and get them involved with content on a more frequent base rather than just when they're supposed to take it, whether it's compliance or required or like it's recommended. Any sort of gamification is not just for entertainment value. It's really to get people in a place where they feel comfortable retaining and interacting with the content you want them to.
There's a phrase called edutainment that often gets thrown around when people want to kind of give the black eye to the idea of gaming and gamification and this notion that it's not of value. And especially in a work culture, I think you'd be pretty hard pressed to find many companies that don't reference some version of we enjoy what we do, we have fun at work as part of just their company kind of values. And I find it interesting that we often take that off the table when it comes to learning, that learning has to be serious, learning has to be dry, it has to be compliant, it has to be whatever, right? This notion that you can't put some entertainment value in your training and that won't make it better for your learner, I think is I'm going to go a little harsher and say I think it's a little ludicrous, a little absurd that we shouldn't have fun while learning. I personally find that if I'm having fun, I enjoy it and I'm motivated by it, I'm going to learn more. I'm going to want to participate more. I'm going to want to be engaged. Maybe I'm alone in that. I don't think I am, but maybe I am. I think we get scared of the idea that entertainment will mean that it will pull people away from work. And I think it's actually the opposite. I think they'll have more fun in it. They'll get more engaged. They'll be more bought into your culture holistically, not just learning, but your company culture. And they'll want to succeed more and be a part of that organization. And I don't think that's a bad thing. All right, we've talked about some of the benefits. We've talked about ways that this often gets misperceived by groups and clients and ways you may want to rethink your mindset on gamification and learning. But how do you really apply this in your work, right? So what are the ways you can take this back and maybe incorporate it into your strategies and your programs that you're already putting on? Let's talk a little bit about when to use these two elements and why they might be different. When we talk about learning games, I think your strategy, and Daniel mentions this all the time, and it couldn't be more true, is you got to think about your objectives. What are you trying to accomplish? And I think learning games are great for when you're trying to help a group of folks understand a new process. Potentially, it's a new decision tree where they've got to interact and make choices. Where maybe you want to institute roles. I'm going to play the part of X and Daniel's going to play the part of Y, and how do we interact? That could be customer and salesperson. It could be analyst and leader, coach and mentors. It could be any number of roles. But you can institute some social learning interaction where they have to compete against or play with each other, right? Do some teamwork building. Those are really great opportunities to do games. Again, it's all about practice and situational context for me in those. Daniel, anything there? And then maybe we can give an example of a good one we've experienced.
Yeah, I think with learning games, one of the things of when and why, I think you really hit the nail on the head. really any new process, new skill that they would need to entail, maybe something that you want to release series of it throughout a curriculum where they could be levels in the game based upon where you are in the organization, and you can continue to grow over time. So for example, let's say it's like a tower defense style game. I'm not sure if anybody understands tower defense, but there could be different skills of like the way somebody walks around a shop floor in a manufacturing plant and is supposed to navigate safely, and based upon what level you're at from a content perspective, that floor could be more complicated, could have more safety hazards you have to avoid and other things like that. But yeah, new processes helps really to keep people engaged and give them reason to go back and engage with that content again. So I think that those are two great places. I think another example of learning games, which is really evolving pretty rapidly, is the use of virtual reality. Those are intended to be gamified environments where you're learning new skills in a virtual world, which is essentially a game. You're interacting and being incentivized to do so by the virtual experience. So I think VR is a great example of how learning games are being implemented more effectively.
One of the best examples I have for use of a learning game, kind of from my own training background, was I took white belt training in my past for Lean Six Sigma. The entire 3-day training event was built around the concept of a game. We were all given a role in a company, and we'd participate with the instructors as a live training, right? So it's not even in the digital space. They can be in both. But we were given a role in a company, and we were given tasks, and we were given a process. And we talked about efficiencies, and we talked about decision making, and we talked about evaluation tools and analysis and assessment, and then testing and piloting, and kind of going through that cyclical cycle that is not unlike what most companies do all the time. But over 3 days, we had to figure out how to deliver an end product to a client through the evaluation of asking questions and all of us doing our roles. We played the part for 3 straight days and trying to weed down the amount of time it took to deliver on spec, on target, and go from there. That was a really great way to, one, institute social interaction into a game, but also to let us practice. And at the end, you've now had a safe space to practice what you're doing. You've seen results in strategy. You've played by a certain set of rules. And now I could easily take that back to my real life scenarios as an analyst at the time and go, okay, how do I trim down some of the work I do? How do I remove some of that waste? And I felt really confident because I'd done it for 3 straight days that I could go back and institute it. The other thing that I think was really great about that is, number one, it built kind of a cohort of all of us that went through it together. So we were all from different business units and things. And that was nice to be able to have that camaraderie. But I know all of us went back and at least told one other person some of the tips and tricks we learned. So I think that's, you've had a great training when your learners are going back and starting to teach others. I think it's a really strong argument for a great success. So that's one way to implement it. I think it's a good example. Let's talk about gamification. When is that the right strategy, and maybe how do you employ that? Look, gamification in and of itself is taking game mechanics and applying it to a non-learning situation. That is the true definition. We're going to talk about it from a learning perspective and how it helps, but we've talked about the real life world of it. This is when you want to motivate employees. You're trying to keep training different, fresh, appealing, not as stagnant or maybe as dry. You're trying to improve retention and potentially even replayability or repetition. We can talk about that if we need to. And you're trying to build culture and L&D brand affinity. So this is an opportunity to get employees excited about training. That's really what it is.
Yeah, I think that when you talk about train, I think it's if you look at platform objectives or content objectives overall, it's a way to motivate someone or walk them down the path you intend them to go down from a learning perspective without having to tell them to go do it. I'm trying to think of a nice metaphor, but I can't think of one right now. So I'll just keep trying to use words, Scott, to get this across. But I log into a platform. Okay, I'm incentivized for logging in and registering and signing up to learn. Okay, I take my first training within the first day that I'm there. I'm incentivized to do so. There's badges to earn different curriculums and complete different curriculums. Sorry, the word I was looking for was complete curriculums. I'm struggling this morning, but hey, we're here. But no, it's about walking them down that garden path that you want them to go down to increase the culture of learning and normalize learning on your own time. I think is the big thing, is just normalizing the concept of continuous improvement, continuous education, and learning without having to tell somebody to go do it, using the competitive nature and the incentivization of points or leaderboards or prizing to get them down that path.
We're beating a dead horse on this, but I mean, the example here is your everyday life. This is now becoming an old reference, I guess. But I used to tell people when we talk about this, I'm like, look in your wallet and look at all your rewards cards. Now they're on your Apple wallet instead. They're not actually in your physical wallet, but that's all right. And just look at all of them. They're all there. So often we think of a utopian environment where learners actually feel motivated to go get their own training. It's not that utopian. It's not that far away from reality for you. If you just think about all the times you choose to go to Starbucks over Dunkin' Donuts or whatever, because there's the loyalty points on your phone and you've got the app, or you choose Delta over Southwest or vice versa, right? Because you know you get a few extra points and you're planning for that big vacation. Delta's not beating you over the head with it. You're choosing to do it constantly by your own kind of design because you've built a brand affinity to it. And you just know they might give you a few promotions here and there or remind you with an email. But for the most part, you're making that conscious effort on your own. Your learners can feel the same way about your training if you really employ those gamification tactics in a really positive manner and kind of build that relationship with them.
Yeah, if I were to just kind of summarize what we've talked about, I think it's important to understand your objectives. Personally, I have not come across a situation after learning more about it and researching about it that gamification wouldn't work or wouldn't apply itself in a positive manner. There's certain roles where all you're doing is taking compliance training, and that's what it is. But there's no reason why you can't incentivize and create a little bit more of a positive spin on the monotonous task is going to take the training you have to do your job. So I think that both gamification and learning games is something I would recommend. Scott, I think you're in the same boat. Recommending always asking yourself, how can I incentivate and motivate my employees? Maybe not even costing yourself some money when you're choosing a learning platform, when you're developing training or implementing a training strategy. So I think they're both something that you should look through and make sure you understand the benefits of it and how it relates to your organization.
I hope that our passion around gamification is coming through because it is something that technically we do a ton of. And we've seen the evidence from our own work with Halite and some of our partners. Heavily gamified platforms is something we have seen the evidence. We've seen the real world scenario where this works. I think we're both fully bought in, just having worked with clients who've had really great success. So I think that covers it on gamification and learning games. Hopefully we've given you some ideas, made you think a little differently about it, and given you some strategies to help employ it.
Come on, get happy.
All right, it's time to get happy. It is our positivity point of the day. It's how we wrap up every show. We try to give you something to head into your weekend with a little bit of excitement, a little bit of energy. And I am unabashedly going to just say I am a baseball dad, as if you didn't know from every other episode we've done. And so I have one more baseball one. This was a big weekend for my oldest. He played in the Summer World Series here in Middle Tennessee. And the boys had to come back from kind of a tough draw on Saturday. But on Sunday, they put together one heck of a run and played in what was kind of an epic 8U championship game for watching Little League Baseball. They had to come back from down 2 runs in the top of the last inning to go up 2, and then they had to hold on to that lead with runners on second and third with 1 out, and they ended up getting the last 2. It was so cool to watch them get their trophy, hugging, celebrating on the field, and become Summer World Series champions here in Tennessee. So that was really awesome for me as a dad to see how much their effort was really cool to watch them put it all together and kind of gel as a team. They're still a pretty young team, just starting out, only their 4th tournament together. So really excited to watch them keep growing. And also, they all have little brothers, so it was really cool to watch them all on the sidelines kind of going, oh, there's the next generation of what's coming in summers to come. So it was a proud dad moment for me. Super excited for my kids.
I think we're starting to see a trend with our positivity points. I think that it's they're typically related around food, sports of some kind. But I think that's what I think in our first episode, we probably outlined these things as things that really drive us. So I'm staying on trend here. Ontario has most of Ontario has moved to stage 2 in our reopening, which I think I mentioned before. But what that means for me is I can get back on field the week of July 6th, and which is next week, and start to train in groups of 10 with my athletes. And I know my athletes are pretty excited about that, just to get back on field and be allowed to be back on field with each other as a group. But I'll say that it's a big part of my life that's been missing. So I'm super excited to get back on the pitch, see the players, and, maybe bring my daughter out for a quick view of daddy coaching. So I'm pretty excited about that. And that's a big positive for me right now. So.
Excellent. Well, that will do it for us today. Thanks again. I'm Scott Babcock. He's Daniel Mendonca, and we will talk to you next week.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the If You Build It, Will They Learn podcast. Be sure to subscribe, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts. Join the conversation by emailing us at podcast@haylight.com. Find us on social media at BuildItLearnIt, and be sure to check us out on the web at www.haylight.com. That's HALIGHT.com.